Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. It's the last session. I hope you still have energy to learn something more and something new about corporate venturing and venture clienting. And we've prepared a world-class panel. It's very, very exciting. So now we're going to welcome the panel on the stage. And the first panelist is Aneri Pradhan, climate ecosystem builder and founder at One of a Kind. Aneri is an award-winning climate and clean energy ecosystem builder with extensive experience in driving accelerators across North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia. Aneri's career spans corporate startup partnerships, energy access program design, and growing global energy networks. And now it gets impressive. She built a network of over 3,000 off-grid energy companies with the UN, operationalized Meta's Social Innovation Lab in partnership with the US government and MIT Media Lab, connected over 1,000 clean energy businesses globally as COO at New Energy Nexus, and facilitated multi-million-dollar commercial deployments between corporates and startups at Elemental Xcelerator. Aneri, welcome to the stage. Next up, we have Lisa Kratochwill, Startup Engagement Manager at VERBUND AG. Lisa holds a background in mechanical engineering with a specialization in energy. She began her career at the German Energy Agency, where she served as an expert in digitization with a strong emphasis on AI. Currently, Lisa is a startup engagement manager at VERBUND, which is Austria's largest utility, bridging the gap between startups and VERBUND's business units and corporate partners through the VERBUND X Accelerator, one of Europe's leading energy cooperation platforms. Lisa, welcome on stage. We have our ladies on. Now it's time for our gentlemen. Next up, I would like to welcome Julien Fredonie, who is head of strategic partnerships and corporate venturing Europe and Africa at Honda Innovations. Julien has over 15 years of experience in venture capital and startup mentoring, contributing to renowned programs such as European Startup Prize, Hello Tomorrow, Rockstart AI Startup Program, Infosys, and more. Julien has also a startup experience as a co-founder and chief marketing officer at Tinkoy and COO at Dalensis. Julien, welcome on stage. And last but not least, let's welcome on stage Greg Zavorotniy, who is a managing partner at rEnergy Partners, an investments firm that spun out of Baywa Group. He has over 20 years of experience in investment banking, principal investments, and operating across energy, mining, and technology sectors, including institutions like Citibank and Deutsche Bank. Greg invested and co-founded a number of impact ventures in Europe, US, and Africa. Greg, welcome on stage. All right. Welcome, guys. So the topic for today is corporate venture capital and venture clienting. So maybe for the audience, let's start with what these two approaches are and what are the differences in these two models and how they support climate tech startups. Julien, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having us. So maybe you picked me to start the conversation because we do both, right? So maybe a quick introduction about what we do. So we are Honda Xcelerator Ventures. We are the open innovation department of Honda, and we have the mission to be the bridge between the entrepreneurs globally and the big corporates. So we articulate this into two activities. One is strategic investments. So we have a fund of 700 million to invest in early stage startups, breakthrough companies, deep tech, mostly climate tech, mostly hardware startups. And the other part of our activity is to create meaningful partnerships between startups globally and the company. So every year we support something like 100 projects between R&D and the startups. So for us, there are definitely differences and some common points, right? The main differences are probably around the time horizons that we are serving. When we look into corporate clienting and strategic projects, it's really about short to mid-term benefits and mutual value that we can create. So it's really about technology that we can implement for our manufacturing processes, current products, etc. Whereas the investment part is maybe more long-term, right? So we invested in a fusion company, for example, so different time horizons, okay? For us, it also means completely different type of work that we achieve practically. We are less involved in the projects we support, we are here, etc. But it's different types of relationships that we are creating. When we are investors, we are supporting the founders. We are looking at maybe several projects that we can create together, joint development, etc. So it's very complementary, but it's also very, very different.
Thank you, Julien. One follow-up question, because it's fascinating. So when you look at your startups, like statistically, how many of the startups would you say like to do both with you, or go for one option or the other? And maybe if you can share some insights, like what kind of startups prefer venture clienting, what kind of startups prefer investment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So all of our portfolio companies, from an investment point of view, do some type of partnership, some projects, several, hopefully, different time horizons, different topics, maybe different business units that we can involve, different types of product. We do cars, motorbikes, business jets, we have space program, energy stuff, etc. So maybe we can apply some partnerships in different units. I think it's a question we always ask to the founders. So I come from a founder background, and we want to be supportive, and at the end, the customers, they are the entrepreneurs for us, right? Even if the corporate pays the bill, the founders are our customers. So we always start the conversation by, okay, what are you most interested in? To do a partnership with us, to have us as a customer, maybe a supplier, or as an investor, or both. And then we shape also different pathways and different types of discussions with different time cycles as well.
Great, thank you, Julien. Then Lisa, maybe moving over to you. You're focusing on venture clienting. Could you maybe say a bit like how it affects the startup growth, commercialization, and long-term sustainability, and what are the challenges and success stories from venture clienting experience?
And that's a lot of topics at once, but let me go through it. Maybe first, just for context, so I'm from VERBUND, as you can see, which is Austria's biggest utility, and I'm there from the innovation department. And so basically, my focus is venture clienting or startup engagement. Venture clienting is a cool new term that people came up with, but that's basically it. We are customers of startups, but we also do invest. So we also have a CVC, and we also do venture building. So we do everything a little bit. As again, my focus is more the venture clienting part. And I would just quickly like to add something to the question you asked to Julien. Because what we see is that actually the venture clienting and the investing goes quite well hand in hand. Because what we see from our investment team, if we have a startup that our business unit already works together with, has a pilot project and says, okay, they have a cool solution and it creates value for our business unit, then this is the perfect due diligence for our investment team, because they say, okay, if VERBUND is a good customer, and if they approve the concept or the product, other companies will too. So it works very often quite well together. Now, to your actual question. So first of all, I mean, every startup needs customers, right? And the first customers, I think, are important because they shape or they help the startup also shape the product, understand maybe how to, in which direction to go. So I think it's very, very important for generally for the growth. One of the biggest challenges is that sometimes corporates, and the energy industry is a quite old, conservative industry, are not ready for startups yet. They're not ready yet for the speed and the agility that startups have on the one side. But also then sometimes startups are not like prepared to work with corporates and how slow we sometimes are and how bureaucratic everything is. And this can lead to frustration that then in the end might lead to a project not being continued just because the two are not really prepared for each other. So I think this is, to be honest, the biggest challenge when it comes to corporate and startup collaborations. And then you ask for challenges and what?
Success stories.
Yeah, success stories, of course. So yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest success stories that we are seeing when it comes to our venture clienting is when we see that obviously it goes into a long-term partnership, and the business unit can either decrease costs or can generate new revenues or just learn something out of it. Of course, this is the goal, you know, for all of these collaborations. However, I would like to emphasize that this is not the only success we see in those collaborations. Sometimes working with startups is a project that maybe fails fast because we see the technology is not ready yet, the corporate is not ready yet, or they see maybe actually it's better to do it by ourselves rather than collaborating. And these learnings, I think they are super, super important for the corporate. Even though it does not go into a long-term collaboration, I think it's still a success, both for the corporate and also for the startup, because also they learn something out of it. Maybe they understand, wait, if this company now decides to want to make this thing by themselves, maybe other companies will do the same. So maybe we have to adjust our product a little bit so we don't kind of, you know, make it in a way that companies think, actually, you know, we can do this ourselves.
So you mentioned one interesting point, that there's a gap between corporate way of doing things and startup way of doing things. So from the accelerator standpoint, like what do you do to create that bridge to enable this collaboration?
It's a tough one. To be honest, it's a cultural thing, right? A corporate cultural thing. So first of all, I think you need commitment from management and C-level in order to do innovation and in order to, you know, have the resources to also kind of try to change the mindset in the company. I think without the commitment, it's very difficult. And then, to be honest, I figured the best way to approach the business units and also make them kind of more open-minded to collaborate with startups is to sit down with them for a coffee or for lunch and talk and ask them, hey, what are you doing? You know, what is your daily business? Maybe what are like kind of pain points? What are things that are difficult for you, challenges, or what is there anything you see that could maybe be improved to increase efficiency? And then they kind of open up. So I think this is important to kind of have this like informal exchanges. And also I think important thing is like when talking with, you know, other business units, we have to get rid of our innovation language. When I go to them and say, you know, we have to do like venture clienting and startup engagement, and they're like, Lisa, what are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. So I think this is important to be aware that their reality looks different than ours, and we have to also make a step towards them.
And if I can, thanks a lot. Great point. I completely agree, and I see our role as some kind of a transmission belt, right? So we need to translate a lot of our complexity into action items, and also the speed of the startup into the reality and the context of a large, sometimes conservative company. But in practice, it comes also with a lot of communication, managing expectation, and being transparent. I think, I'm not sure if it was Spider-Man or Lao Tzu who said something like, with great power comes great responsibility. Right, and my first startup actually failed because of a big corporate, or because maybe I didn't manage the relationship with the big corporate. So we need to be very transparent about the outcome, about the potential of failure, about the the timelines, because the impact for us is maybe meaningless, but impact for the startup is very important. So clear communication, managing expectations, transparency, etc.
Thank you, Julien. And Aneri, you focus on ecosystem building. So we would love to hear also your perspective, like how can we prepare startups for working with corporates and how this ecosystem building looks like?
Yes, absolutely. So I've observed, especially in the climate tech and kind of sustainability ventures, that because the founders are very technical and very in love with their solution, they struggle to explain how exactly it solves the problem for the corporate. And so I highly recommend, especially for early stage startups that don't have yet a VP of sales or business development, to get B2B sales training, because it's a real art, and you have to learn how to explain the technology in a way that actually truly solves the pain points that the corporate's having, not just how great the technology is. And I hear that way too much, I have to say, with the startups just talking about how they have the best technology, but that's actually not what sells. The second piece, too, is to really understand the people in the corporate. So one of the best things I learned when I was a founder from a sales coach, because I've also gone through sales coaching, is you're not selling to a corporate, you're selling to a person. And that is so key because, these people are all champions. They're the people that startups connect with to understand the corporate and the dynamics of the corporate, the pain points of the corporate, but they're actually not the decision makers. It's the business units in the corporates that are actually going to be the one purchasing the technology. So to set yourself up for success, they have to have all the information about your technology, your solution, so that they can sell internally to the business units, and that's really key. So there's so many people as part of the process that you have to tailor your sales pitch to actually be successful. The third thing too is that, especially for large corporates, different business units are kind of like different companies. So you can't just have like one pitch deck for VERBUND, for example. You have to have a sales deck for the person in the business unit that you're selling to. So for example, when I worked on corporate partnerships for Honda Xcelerator, we had a partnership with Amazon. And we had two different business units, the middle mile team and the e-mobility team. And both of them had overlap in the types of solutions they were interested in, but for very different reasons and different pain points. So we had to coach the companies in our portfolio on what the middle mile team is looking for, what the e-mobility team is looking for. And it's actually a very different use case. So you really have to get in to understand what exactly your technology is solving for the person in the business unit, and and then it's the corporate above, right? And last, I have to say as well that I meet a lot of founders who think if I just get my first customer, my first pilot, then I can raise my investment money. And I think that's the wrong attitude to have. You should never approach a corporate with, I want to have a successful pilot. You should approach a corporate with, I want to have reoccurring revenue and scale my technology with this corporate. If you approach it from a pilot perspective and set KPIs for a successful pilot, you might face death by pilot, which happens a lot in the climate tech sector, where it's very difficult to go beyond the pilot and actually scale your solution. So like with the Amazon example, that actually did unfortunately happen. Like it got stuck as a pilot and it didn't scale to the other business units. And when you think about how large these companies are and how big the commercial opportunities are, it's a really missed opportunity if you're not thinking bigger than pilot.
Thank you, Aneri. It's a golden nugget of knowledge. So how can we transfer this knowledge to startups? Like, what can we do to help them get that mindset and to teach them and pitch better to hit the points that the corporates are looking for?
The ecosystem builders are part of that solution. So accelerator programs that specialize in go-to-market, sales coaches that can really help set up companies for success with a potential big client, even like programs like VERBUND Xcelerator, which are also specialized in helping the companies that they take in to learn how to sell to their corporate. Like, these are all different methods, different ways, but still the same results of how do you scale these solutions.
Amazing. And Greg, you decided to spun out of a corporate. So can you tell us a bit about different approaches, hybrid approaches, and what you see out there?
Yeah, so from our side, I mean, we've been in a corporate environment for a number of years. It made a lot of sense to spin out, and partially because maybe what you guys mentioned here is, unless you have a very dedicated team supporting the startups and integrating them somehow into the corporate structure, almost makes no sense to have a corporate involved. And there probably is kind of a negative impact sometimes on the startup business. So from our side, I mean, we were quite relatively sort of small part of a larger group. There was no dedicated team to integrate the businesses into the kind of strategic direction of the group. As an investor, then you're much better off to be kind of independent. Having said that, in the energy space, it's great to have a number of strategic partners on board. It's great to have larger corporates behind you. So from our side, what we're looking at as rEnergy partners, we look to onboard a number of corporates, hopefully, as well as large institutional investors onto our platform to invest in relatively early stage energy opportunities and infrastructure opportunities. So I think, kind of goes in line with the strategy here is if you have a dedicated team and you're building a sizable strategic unit, it makes sense to invest and have that in the same kind of platform under one corporate. If not, corporate is better off being an LP into a fund rather than just kind of having a relatively high cost independent unit within a corporate, which doesn't really work together strategically usually.
Perfect, thank you. So maybe we talked about two approaches, compared them, contrasted them. So maybe, like, from your perspective, is it better to go for venture clienting, CVC, or do both? Like, how do you see it?
I think a lot of startups, I mean, first of all, we need to kind of figure out what is a venture case and what's not. And we talked about this before, and I think within the energy space, it's quite difficult to see the same VC returns as you see in the traditional kind of fintech, consumer tech, sort of in traditional kind of VC models. So energy is different. That's one thing. So whatever works in the energy environment probably will not work in other environments. From our side, where I see the interesting opportunity is to actually coming to corporates to test the ideas, so it's important. Having them as a kind of the lead investor on your cap table, I find that very, very difficult. It sort of puts a lot of pressure on the startup, on the founders, but it also creates a little bit of uncertainty for the exit scenario, right? So, and we had very good startups which actually came to us first and then sort of realized, well, they had other options. And rightly so, they took independent sort of capital because they cannot rely on one corporate to kind of support their growth. The other problem with typically, historically with corporates is, the CVC units, they tend to kind of come and go with different management teams. We see it now in the energy industry more and more. You see big examples in BP now, a few others. Shell had already 2 CVC units over the 20-year history. So, it's difficult to rely on pure CVC funding, in my view. It has to be independent. I think once you've made the decision, as a corporate to have a venture investment unit, you need to have a team of people basically integrating those businesses into the kind of the whole group.
And Julien, you guys are also investing. So how do you see the investment space, like the competitiveness of corporate investor, strategic investor, as compared to independent? Do you see it as a challenge, or is the position of a corporate strong?
Yeah, thanks. Maybe can I add one point? Maybe
of course.
I think in general, completely agree. Great point. I think in general there's. I mean, to make it practical, when you're a founder, you need to rely on your champions, as you were saying. That's really true. But you need, at the same time, once you're in, you need to grow your own network, because people change. In our case, we have some reorganization every year. So people will shift, R&D people will shift, some projects, of course, will not be impacted, but some maybe change. So you cannot rely only on one champion. So that's, let's say, a piece of advice to use, to leverage the champions, but also to grow your own network in the corporate. And then how the relationship between financial VCs and corporate work, I think, at the end, most of the corporates, I think 80-something, they follow. They understand there are a position of strategic value added as well. So most of the time, the financials would lead the round, and the CVCs would come in. I mean, that's a good advice to bring the CVCs in at the right time. So once you have a strategic need for them. I mean, when your choice, of course, always better, right? But you need to understand also the beyond the ticket size, what strategic value you expect from them. That needs to be part of the discussion early on. That needs to be also agreed. So yeah, I think that's one piece of advice as well.
I'd like to add something to that, since we're also both investing and doing this venture clienting. So first of all, I think as a CVC, I always use, I like to use a metaphor that I'd like to present to you. I think it's important, like when you're a teacher and you have a class and you have your students, and you want to, of course, like look at their strengths and their weaknesses, and you want to support them, right? So that's great. But now suddenly, this would be like a VC, okay? And then suddenly, like your son or your daughter are in your class. So now you're a teacher and you're a parent at the same time. And of course, which is not a CVC. So now, of course, you have two interests, right? So of course, you want to return on investment, but you also want to strategically use the startup for your corporate. And I think it's just very important to still be able to, separate those two, and to not like the one interest influence the other. So to push, for example, like a startup you invested in on one of your business units just because you invested in. So if it's interesting for them, cool, perfect fit. If not, okay, then that's the way it goes. So I think one aspect to this. Another thing I would like to say though is where I see a big strength in having also a CVC like in a startup, or like having a CVC as an investor for a startup, is that as a CVC, of course, like you have a completely different base of expertise for the startup. So if, for example, our startups invested in, if they want to better understand the market of PV and wind, or if they want to understand the hydrogen market, or if they want to understand the hydropower, we have it all. And we can easily connect them with the experts in our company. And we can tell them, look, please talk with them, because it's a startup we invested in. If you just, approach a random corporate and you say, I would like to talk with you and I would like to gain some knowledge, they might say yes, but they also might say, I don't have time, I don't have interest. But in this setting, it's a bit different. So I think this is a really big advantage of having a CVC amongst your investors. Besides, of course, also the negative aspects that might influence it.
I think it's actually very difficult to get business units to focus on a startup unless they know there's going to be a very, very close correlation with their performance. So, incentivizing people to do work for you in a corporate is not an easy thing. I don't know how you find it. There are few people who are genuinely interested in the startup and what they're doing in the tech, but by and large, it's very difficult to motivate. And we've seen examples where having basically a startup in the kind of corporate structure works negative for a startup in the case. So I think we got to be careful quite often. But yeah, there are a lot of very good case studies where it works, but there are also quite a number which just don't work out properly.
I think especially in our field, which is the deep tech, climate tech angle, I think the corporate, as you were saying, the corporate have a specific value, especially when it's related to hardware, when it's related to building production facilities or plants, etc. That's an area where we've seen a lot of startups being very interested in, collaborating, having us as a strategic investor as well. We help somehow in this kind of a scaling phase as well, being also a bit disconnected from the financial, typical cycles of the fund life, etc. Creates also more patient type of capital. So at the end, I think this is very symbiotic, and it's really about finding the best fit with the best business units, sitting down with the units, and managing the expectations of everyone. So,
yeah, in my experience working with different portfolios, there is a little bit of apprehension in working with CVCs, to be honest, because there is this kind of reputation that there's something more than investment going on, right? So I think there has to be kind of some persuasion, especially for really hot companies that are raising easily, for why take CVC money. I think for more of the venture clienting aspect, I think it's also super important to build relationships not only with the business units, but even the C-level. Because as you talked about the turnover and the changing of positions, it's extremely common. I've also noticed that myself. But when you get buy-in from the very top, the business units tend to fall in line. So, and all the startups I've talked to who have had successful POCs that led to reoccurring revenue, all of them had relationships with someone in the C-suite.
All right, thank you. So we're coming towards the end of the panel, unfortunately, but we've learned a great deal from our seasoned panelists. So thank you so much for being on the stage and for sharing your insights. I think we touched on both corporate investments and venture clienting, and there is definitely value in both. Corporates are a very specific type of entity, and founders need to understand the language, need to understand how to sell, and need to have also patience for sometimes longer and harder to understand processes, but it can lead to great value creation for the startup from this collaboration. So thank you all so much once again for the panel, and with this we would like to end the session. Thank you for having us.